Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to How to Get Hired. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is the weekly live stream where we talk all about careers, job search, so job interviews, resumes, applications, networking, all that kind of stuff. This is a live Q&A, so this is where I answer your questions. The title of today's episode is STAR Interview Questions. Answer like a pro. So we are going to be starting off by talking about how to answer STAR questions, which are the same thing as behavioral interview questions. I'm going to give you the answer to that, and then we're going to open it up to questions. If you see my face, you should see a chat box somewhere nearby. Get in the chat. Let me know what you're struggling with, what you're wondering about, and I will do my best to help you out. As always, public service announcement, special thanks to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. My Patreons, my super thanks donors, and to you. Thank you for being here. You are awesome. And you are engaged in self-improvement. So that's how I know that. Okay, let's just dive into this, shall we? STAR interview questions. You might have heard about these. Can you answer any job interview question in the STAR format? No, you can't. It's only for a very specific type of question they ask you. And those are questions that usually start with, tell me about a time, right? These type of questions. Everybody loves these type of questions. They're technically called behavioral interview questions because they're asking you about how you behaved in a previous situation that you were in. Okay, that's what they're for. And the principle behind these, if you're wondering why they ask you these, is because recruiters have been taught a principle, and the principle is that past behavior predicts future behavior. Okay, so that's why they're asking you about something you did in your past, right? Do they care about your past? No. They're asking you about something you did for some other organization. Technically it's irrelevant to them, right? But the reason they're asking is because they figure if you behaved that way in the past, then if we were to put you in that situation again, you would behave the same way. That's the logic they're applying, right? So they're really trying to find out how would you behave if you were put in a certain situation today. Okay, that's what these questions are really about. Now, the problem is that if you're preparing for a job interview, okay, a lot of the standard job interview questions, you can go online, you can go and read books or get on the internet or watch videos like mine, and figure out how to answer those standard job interview questions, right? There's about 10 of these. Things like, tell me about yourself. What are your salary expectations? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Stuff like that. Those kind of standard interview questions. You can go and make a list of those questions and look up how to answer them, practice the answer, rehearse a few times, and then go and you're ready to be asked those in a job interview. It's pretty simple. The problem is that behavioral interview questions, because there's like literally a million different questions they could ask you, okay, there's so many possible things they could ask. It's not really possible to prepare for these in the same way. You can't just try and anticipate every question you could possibly be asked, go find an answer for it, and then memorize the answer and rehearse them, and then that's how you're prepared. You can't really do that. Now, if you don't believe me on this, do this experiment. I don't have a web browser open, so I can't do it with you, but go to Google or something and type in behavioral interview questions, and then the name of the job you're going for. So if you're going for like a project manager job or something, you could type in behavioral interview questions project manager. Okay. And you will see that there's like tons of questions they could possibly ask you. It's not really possible to, prepare for each one and try and practice each one. That would be impossible. Okay. So we have to change how we prepare for these in a job interview. So I'm going to give you that now. Okay. Let's see. Where are we here? I'm just looking at some notes I wrote for myself. Okay, here's how you prepare for these, okay? How can I put this? A lot of the questions are quite similar, okay? Because they might be asking you about a specific situation, right? But there's only a few types of situations, right? So the way to prepare for these is, I'll just say it. Think of 10 stories from your past, okay? We're going to talk about what those 10 are in a moment, but just think of 10 stories from your past. You're going to rehearse those stories. First of all, you're going to vet them. You're going to make sure that it would be okay for you to mention this in a job interview. It's not signaling anything bad about you. It's only signaling good things, right? We're going to vet them. We're going to also make sure that, these are things that you've done, but if you were put in the same situation today, you would do exactly the same thing. It's not like this is how you handled it in the past, but you've since learned that that's not the best way to deal with it. And if you had to go back and do it again, you would do something different, right? So we're going to vet these stories, make sure that, they would be something you would redo. It is the right way of handling it. And when you tell your story, it only signals good things about you and it doesn't raise any red flags, okay? So after we vetted these 10 stories, okay, you're going to practice saying those stories in the STAR format. Okay, now you might have heard of the STAR format. It's everybody's absolute favorite thing, right? Because I know that everyone, all 20 of you that are watching this right now, you are as passionate about job interview questions as I am. Okay, so I know you're going to be loving this. You practice saying these stories in the STAR format. We're going to get to what that is in a moment, okay? And then the idea is that any question that they could possibly ask you that's a behavioral interview question, okay, that you would answer in the STAR format, any question like that, you're going to pull out one of these 10 stories that you've rehearsed. You may have to adapt it a tiny bit, change a couple of words, but it's basically an answer for whatever they're asking. If you choose 10 stories that, they talk about the correct things, then you should be well equipped to go to a job interview, and then any behavioral question they could ask you, you will be able to pull out one of these 10 stories and it will fit what they're asking you. Okay, this is the idea. That's the approach for how to answer these. Okay. Now, what stories should you pick? Okay, this is what I recommend. Okay, you're going to pick 10 stories. 5 of them or so are going to be your most shining moments. So if you ever crushed it at a job you've had previously, you did something, it worked out really well, you were commended by your boss, you were maybe even promoted for it, whatever. 5 of those, 5 success stories, things that you did that were done properly, right? And then you're going to pick 5 kind of failures, okay? Things that it was a tough situation, and I'll give you some answers for this. So, for example, the success stories, 5 success stories. Think of times that you successfully dealt with conflict. Okay, so conflict with a boss, conflict with a coworker, right? There was a difference of opinion. People were not getting along. How did you deal with it? Okay, how did you successfully deal with change? Something changed. The situation changed. Work conditions changed, whatever. And you handled it really well. Okay, think of a time like that. Think of a time that you showed creativity and it turned out really well. You came up with a creative solution to solve a problem or something like that. So these are ideas for those 5 success stories you're going to try and think of from your past, okay? And then for the failure stories, the 5 failure stories, if you can see my hand way over there, okay? See, that means 5. I got 5 fingers. Some people don't, so you don't want to make assumptions here. Okay, think about failure things, like where you failed at a task. Okay, so you were given a task and you tried something and at least the first effort did not work. Okay, the time you missed the deadline, time there was a miscommunication, or a time you were stressed out. Okay, think of 5 stories about those. Now, preferably they're things where you've turned it around. Okay, you overcame it, right? But maybe your first attempt or something didn't work. Okay, now that's a good cross section of types of situations that you can speak to. Okay, So what you do in rehearsal and when you practice and you prepare yourself for a job interview is you think of these 10 stories and you run them over and over. You rehearse them, okay? And you're going to be rehearsing saying them in this particular format, the STAR format. So STAR stands for STAR, situation, task, action, result. You got that? Situation, task, action, result. Situation, task, action, result. Okay, so that's the format. So there are other formats too. You know, they're all sort of loosey-goosey, you know, kind of thing. Anyone is fine. Situation, task, action, result. That means, okay, when you tell a story, someone says, tell me about a time that you had to deal with a conflict and it was challenging, but you did it very, very well. Okay, there's an example. So you would tell your story in the STAR format. So situation, well, it was in my last job where I was in the role of project manager at this company. Okay. Task, I was given the job to give the daily work briefing to a team that I was in charge of. Okay. So that sets it up. Action, situation, task, action. So here's what I did. I explained the work detail. You know, there was this issue. Somebody got upset. You know, whatever it is, there was some kind of challenge. So what I did was I took the employee aside one-on-one after the briefing with the entire team, and I said, "Listen, is there some issue that, you know, I need to be aware of? It doesn't seem like you're really understanding what I'm saying, or you're taking exception to what I'm saying. What's going on? You know?" And then they said this, and then I said that, okay? And then I told them, this is what we're going to do. Okay, this was my solution. And then result, how did it turn out? Well, that employee went back to work. They worked for the rest of the day. There were no issues. They interoperated with the rest of their team, and everything was fine. There you go. Okay, so situation, task, action, result. So you're going to practice telling these 10 stories using the STAR format, okay? Now, if you're doing it correctly, it should take you a minute or less to tell each one of these stories, okay? That's the amount of detail you give. You don't give a 10-minute story that goes on forever and they have to cut you off, okay? So practice telling these 10 stories so that you've got them in the STAR format. You can tell them in under a minute. You're not going into extraordinary levels of detail. You just get the point across, right? And as you can tell, a story like the one that I just made up off the top of my head, which was pretty pathetic actually, but a story like that, if someone said, tell me about a time where you had an issue with communicating to people, but you resolved it, you would tell that story. If someone said, tell me about a time where you learned something about dealing with people, tell me about a time when you did that, you would tell that story. If someone said, tell me about a time where you realized your own weaknesses and realized that, you know, you have some improvement to do, tell me a story that demonstrated that to you, you would tell that same story. You see how it's like an answer to multiple questions, right? That's why you have 10 of these, so that whatever you're asked, one of the 10 will be a pretty decent fit. You might have to change a couple of words, but you could tell the story. It will be an answer for the question. It will be vetted. It will only signal good things about you, and you will pass the question. And the great thing is that you don't have to think of an answer. When you're in an interview, you might potentially have multiple people staring at you, right? A lot of people find it hard to think under those circumstances, okay? So you will be able to handle any behavioral interview type question that they throw you. Okay. Now, one last kind of footnote to this answer that I'm giving you of how to answer behavioral questions, STAR questions. You can use, as I said, there's more than one format. There's STAR, there's CAR, like it just squeezes the S and T into one more compact thing. There's STARL, where you add L on the end, STAR L, which is learning. You say what you learned, right? Which is good if you're asked about a failure. Tell me about a time you failed completely. How did you handle it? Okay, so here's a time I This is what I was doing. This is what I was trying to do. This is what I did. This is how it turned out. And this is what I learned. So that next time I know that if that ever happens again, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. And instead, I'm going to do this. So I don't run into the problem I ran into that time. Something like that. Okay. And at the very end of the day, if you're like absolutely stumped for some kind of behavioral question or STAR question that they threw at you, just remember, you can always fall back on saying, well, a specific situation from my past doesn't immediately leap to mind, but here's what I would do in that situation. Okay, so at least you have an answer. If you honestly feel that, no story of yours can remotely be an answer for what they're asking you something completely out of left field, you can always fall back on that answer. And just to repeat it, it's to say, well, I don't remember a specific situation, off the top of my head where that happened. But here's how I would handle it. Okay? And that would be my recommendation for how you answer STAR questions / behavioral questions in a job interview. They're a bit tricky, but if you do this preparation, they will not be a problem for you. Okay. GC John K says, the difficult part about those 10 examples is remembering the details without forgetting something, at least for me. No, it shouldn't be a problem, John. I mean, remember, you're talking about 10 things from your past, okay? So memorizing it shouldn't be hard because this is a memory of yours you already have, right? Presumably you remember what happened on this occasion at work, right? Secondly, there shouldn't be that much detail because you're telling the story in less than a minute. It should take less than a minute to tell the entire story, okay? So that gives you an idea of the amount of detail we're talking about here, okay? And what the rehearsal will do, what the preparation will do for you is it'll get you to practice telling these stories in a sort of very compact way. The goal is not to be there for 10 minutes telling some big long story that eventually they have to cut you off. You know what I mean? The goal is to say like, there was a time when this happened. This is what I did. This is what I tried. This was the result. And this is what I learned, that works well. And that reinforces why I would take that approach. Pretty compact. So remembering 10 things like that about different types of things, conflicts with people, challenges in doing the job, something totally unexpected happened, you had to deal with it, applying creativity, some creative solution you did, some brilliant idea that you were commended for. They're pretty varied. So if you do your preparation, it really shouldn't be like a huge deal to remember these if you're doing it right. GTA Live says, for technical jobs, when they ask a technical question and you don't know the answer, what's the best approach? Well, it depends on the details. Now, are you talking about some kind of pseudo aptitude test where they ask you like a math problem or, some kind of highly technical problem, like you have to troubleshoot this thing or solve this puzzle and you can't do it for them? Is that what you're talking about? It depends. I mean, it depends on the nature of it. If it's like a math problem and you just, you're just lost, you just can't do it. You would have fallback answers for that kind of thing. One of them would be to say like, well, unfortunately, I'm rather nervous right now and I can't really collect my thoughts and do this. But, it would be something along the lines of this answer or something like that. The other type of technical question that they can throw at you, it seems like a technical question, but it really kind of isn't in a way. It's called an estimation question. And these have been all the rage for the past 5 years or so. I think you encounter those more in some industries than others, but it's a really stupid idea. See, what they do is they ask you this really weird technical sounding question. They'll say, how many golf balls can fill this room? and they're dead serious. I need an answer. How much does, like, I don't know, some building that you're familiar with, how much does the Burj Dubai weigh? I need an answer, And it seems like, oh, are you expecting for me to have memorized that? Because I have no clue. But that's not what those questions are about. This is so stupid. What they are is they're not expecting you to know the exact answer by either memorization or by being able to calculate it. But what they're, in theory, the way this works is what they're looking for is to see if you can do the process of rough estimation. So you would say, okay, how many golf balls are there in this room? Well, this room is 10 feet by 10 feet by 20 feet. So that's 10 times 10 times 20, right? So that's what, 2,000 square feet or something? And in one, or cubic feet, and in 1 cubic foot, you could hold, let's say, I don't know, about 10 packs of golf balls, or whatever we're talking about, golf balls. And a pack of golf balls contains 10 golf balls. So that's 10 times 10. So it's 100 per cubic foot. There are 2,000 cubic feet in here. So I would say approximately 200,000 golf balls so you could fit into this room. Something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's so stupid. This is like basic math and scientific skills, if you want to call it that. But that's what recruiters are after when they ask this kind of question. And they've been asking these types of questions when the recruiters are interviewing for a technical role. Now, it's dumb because recruiters are not trained on the role that they're recruiting for, right? So if they're trying to hire a scientist or a developer or a technician or something like that, they don't know any of this stuff, but they think they're so clever by asking estimation questions. So then they can go, you have the technical chops to be able to do this job. Like, it's so stupid. So sometimes when you get questions like that, it's really an estimation question that they're asking you, and it's really not that technical. The timestamp guy says, I like using par instead of star. Congratulations, timestamp guy. You do that. I've never heard of par. The other one I've heard of is CAR, which is, what does that stand for? It's where, like I said, they take the S and the T, which is situation and task, and they amalgamate it into one, right? The idea is that when you give these answers, they care more about the A and the R, the action that you took and the results that it delivered, right? So it amounts to the same thing. You don't want to spend all your time talking about the situation. You don't want to spend all your time talking about the task you had been given to accomplish, right? You want to say all that in like one sentence if you can. I was working as a project manager. I had to, ensure that all the employees on my team were doing their job, and I had to supervise. There you go. That's S and T together, right? So people like to create new and exciting versions of the same thing, so they call it different things, but it amounts to the same thing. What people care about is what you did and how did it turn out. And that's what they care about. So that's where you want to put most of your details, right? The judiciary says, hello to the justiciary or the judiciary. Justiciary? I'm not a word guy, but welcome. So there you go. There's 37 people here. Thank you for joining me here today. That's basically my recommendation for how to answer behavioral interview questions. Now, I'm opening it up if you guys have any questions about this or about anything else related to careers, getting hired, job interviews, job applications, the hidden job market, networking, all that kind of stuff. Fire away. I'm here to help you if I can. Excuse me. The justiciary says, what to do when you have a bossy coworker, they think they're the boss. Well, you need to cut them down to size, don't you? I mean, what the hell's the point of being called the justiciary if you can't throw your weight around? Listen, I'll give you a sort of bit of I don't know what you call it. Let me hit you with some knowledge, however you say that. Whenever they ask you about any kind of conflict, right? And just for the record, a conflict is a difference of opinion between people. It's not necessarily a confrontation, but a conflict. Okay? Any kind of difference of opinion, you don't get along with somebody, you're not communicating with somebody, they have different ideas. What's the answer every single time? Communication. It's going to be some form of communication will be the solution. Okay? I mean, I've been an executive manager. I know what I'm talking about. That's basically how it always works, right? So what do you do when you have a coworker that thinks they're the boss and they think that you exist to serve them at their pleasure, right? And they start bossing you around? Here's what you do. The first thing is you talk to them, right? You talk to them one-on-one. You say, hey, listen, come over here for a second. You know, I've been noticing that you've been doing this, right? From my perspective, it seems like you're ordering me around. You're giving me work instructions, you know? Now, my understanding was that I don't report to you. I report to the supervisor, as do you, you know? Is that not correct according to you, or some? Like, do you have a different appraisal of that? You know, kind of thing. Get their sort of, you know, understanding. Like, this is what I understand about what's been going on here. You know, I don't quite understand this. Well, I'm under the impression I don't report to you. I report to them. So it's kind of strange how you're giving me instructions all the time. Is that incorrect? What do you say about that? Let them say their piece, right? They might say something like, yeah, I know technically you report to them, but I've been here longer than you, so I get to tell you what to do, you know, or something like that, right? Let's hear their side of it. And then if you guys can resolve it amongst yourselves, great. But let's say you can't, okay? So you'd say, okay, no problem. Well, I can see that we are obviously not agreeing about this. Maybe we need to go talk to the supervisor and get this sorted out. I'd like to get this sorted out. Because if I got to do what you say, I would like to know that officially before I just do stuff for you. You know, whatever, right? So whatever solution that you propose is always going to be some form of communication. The best place to start is you go talk to the person one-on-one. You explain kind of from my perspective, this is how I see it. What's your perspective? Like, what's going on here according to you? Just so I understand. You know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to learn, but let's hear your side of this. You know? And pretty much like every conflict type problem or question, the answer will look something like that. Okay? And then it's just a matter of getting it resolved. To what degree, what lengths do you have to go to get it resolved? Maybe you can't resolve it, you escalate it further, you get clarification, you know, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? And if not, you can always just bring the hammer down, right? I mean, if I was called the justiciary, I'd first of all get that tattooed right across my forehead, and then I'd make sure my presence was felt. David says, thanks for the suggested success scenarios. Something similar I prepared for every specific role from my CV. Okay, good. You're welcome. I'm glad it's working. The justiciary says, thank you for your valuable insight. My pleasure, and thank you for being here. You asked a very intelligent question. Katerina, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Ekaterinburg in Russia. I think that was the place where they blew away the Tsar, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember my history. Thank you for your star approach. Helped me get the job. Oh, great. That's great to hear. I will purchase the class on communication you have. Great. That's great to hear. And I'm glad that it's helped you. Congratulations on the job there, Katerina. This might be a good time just to mention, yes, I got these courses. They're right up in your face on the screen there. That's the communications course. That's all the stuff that I had to learn with regard to communication skills to climb the ladder, okay, to be an executive. I did not know that stuff coming out of school. I did not know that you see, communication skills. I didn't know that stuff in my 20s. I had to tack that on after my 20s. And that's basically all the stuff I had to tack on. In order to climb the ladder, if that's something that you're interested in advancing your career. Usually everybody starts off with technical skills of some kind in some industry at some level, right? And then if you want to supervise people or supervise projects or supervise assets or supervise the money, it's a matter of tacking things on. So usually the first thing that you have to tack on are soft skills, if you don't already have them, being able to communicate with people and all this kind of stuff. If you want to really climb the ladder, you got to have really advanced communication skills, because you're not just using it to actually communicate with people. You're expected to represent your organization to a degree, even if it's only to your subordinates, but that's expected of you. So that's where you got to tack this stuff on. And then sometimes you have to tack on other things depending on what you're doing, like how to manage money, right? And how to manage people, right? So these are things that you need in addition to the technical skills that will enable you to be a candidate for moving upwards. So I put all the communication skills component into that course for people that are interested in that kind of thing. It's called Write Like a Professional. It is about writing, but it's mainly about what to say, how to respond. So that's what that course is about. And there's links in the descriptions to all of these. Excuse me. So get in the chat. I'm just waiting for your questions. I'm here to respond to your questions. What are you struggling with? What are you wondering about? Let me know. I will try and help you out. Brainwasher is here. Brainwasher says, do you think a polygraph test is a red flag? I was invited for a content manager supervisor position. Listen, what I think doesn't matter, okay? If you're wanting to know my thoughts are that's kind of weird, but I can see how in certain industries, namely if you were going into do some kind of security work, or police work or other areas, you could maybe justify it, possibly, okay? But if you're just getting a run-of-the-mill job, it's not involved in security, it's not involved in anything that, that might be sensitive, it could be a red flag, yes. It could be the sign of a paranoid organization, okay? But if I was given an interview, if I was invited down to an interview with a company for a job, and they said you had to take a polygraph test, I wouldn't necessarily refuse the interview and just forget the whole thing just because of that. I would be open to it. Now, I've never taken a polygraph test personally, so I don't know. But listen. Like I've mentioned on my channel several times, there's a way to get this kind of very specialized information if it's really important to you, okay? And it's very simple. You go on, let's pretend, okay, this is what? A content manager supervisor position. Go on LinkedIn, do a search, a people search for content manager supervisor, okay? And confine it to your hometown or wherever it is that you're interviewing. And, you'll see the results will be a bunch of individuals. They'll all be content manager supervisors, okay? Or former content manager supervisors. You can contact those people directly on LinkedIn. You can reach out to them and say, hey, would I be able to give you a quick phone call to ask you about your role as a content manager supervisor? I'm trying to get into that role myself with another company, and I'm just wondering what to expect. Or you could just send it directly in a message if it's a simple question and say, can I ask, were you ever required to take a polygraph as a condition to interviewing for the job you're now in? Something like that. They're making me take a polygraph for a content manager position. I'm just trying to figure out if that's normal or this is some weird thing that nobody ever does. Something like that. And these people can tell you, right? So if you really, really care and you really want an answer to know if this is like a standard for that industry that you don't know about, or it is just totally out of left field, you can get answers to that. Ghost says polygraph tests are kind of fun to take, and I'm not a Fed. Okay. It could be a hobby for psychopaths, I suppose. It's like, they ask you all kinds of questions. Is your name Bill? And you're like, no. Do you want this job? No. Do you live in the world? No. And then you pass with flying colors, right? That could be kind of fun. Reese says, I got hired at my last job for a position that paid more and got stuck in a different position that paid less. Well, that sucks, Reese. You wouldn't be the first one that they've done that kind of runaround to. Now, sometimes, and I'm being kind here, sometimes it's not always the result of a complete idiot who doesn't know what they're doing. Sometimes the business changes and they've had to move things around. They don't want to fire people, so the alternative to laying people off is moving them around sometimes. Sometimes they can do that, right? They're just, business is down. We don't have a need for this many employees. It's hard to pay all the employees. So, it doesn't make any sense to have them doing this stuff. There's no work for them, so we can move them around as an alternative of letting them go. Sometimes you get that, but other times I would say it's more likely that, the person in charge doesn't know what they're doing, right? They don't have a clue what they're doing. And, or it can be worse than that. It can be deception, where they hire you for one position, right? And that's how they get you. They want a talented, qualified person. So they advertise for this higher upscale position. So you apply and they maintain this false pretense that, that's the position that we're going to put you in. And then at the end, they do a switcheroo and tell you, oh, it's, there's this other position that, is opened up now. And maybe that'll be a temporary thing until this position you've interviewed for opens up. There's all kinds of stupid shenanigans like that going on. You know what I mean? I sympathize if this is what they're doing to you. But you know what? You look out for number one. Just remember, you have no loyalty to these people. They act entirely in their self-interest. You should act entirely in your self-interest, okay? So there's nothing that says you can't be looking for other positions while you're there. And if something comes along, hey, you can jump ship, or you could go back to them first and say, I got another offer. I'm not going to give you the details, but it's going to be paying me this. Can you match it? And they say no. And it's like, okay, see you later. Okay, where do I leave off here? That was Reese. So the justiciary says, when would you go to HR? Now, the justiciary was the bossy coworker thing. Okay. Okay. So the way you handle this stuff in the real world, justiciary, is it's like a progression. Okay. Obviously, you go over people's heads, you escalate it, right? But it's inappropriate to do that before you've attempted to resolve it directly with the person. Now, I know that can be very tough in some situations, especially if it's like an issue with like harassment or anything like that, but it can be bad for you if you just automatically go right to the boss without even telling the person, like, I'm sorry, I don't appreciate that, or I take offense to that, or I find what you're doing, strange, because to my knowledge, I don't report to you. You know what I mean? Maybe they're under the false impression. Maybe the boss told them, right? They told them before you were hired that the new person is going to report to them. Maybe that's what's going on here. You don't know. So just in case there's any kind of weird thing like that going on, you always should attempt to resolve it with the person first. At least make the attempt. Now, if they bite your head off or whatever, it's like, okay, hey, I made the attempt. Okay, but they were very hostile, so it was clear to me that, that was not going to be a way to resolve this. So then you go to the next level up. Now, depending on what type of issue it is, okay, now for your issue, which was somebody thinks they're in charge of you when they're officially not, you don't report to them, okay, the next logical place to go would be to talk to your boss. Before you run to the HR department, you would talk to your boss and say, listen, I got a question. When I was hired, my understanding was, it's first of all, it says this on my employment contract. So my understanding was that I report to you, right? And all the other coworkers in my group, my colleagues, they all report to you too, right? So we all report directly to you. I don't report to them, right? That was my understanding. And, now correct me if I'm wrong, as I want to make sure of that, right? Now, if they say, no, you report to that person, and maybe you got a problem with that, you say, well, that's not what I agreed to. Like, that was not communicated to me. And if that has changed, nobody's advised me of that, So if you can't get it resolved with your supervisor, then you could escalate it further. And that could be either their boss or the HR department, depending on the nature of the issue. Okay? So that's kind of how you would do this. If you don't follow that basic process where you attempt to resolve it with the person first, then go to your immediate boss, then go higher, it can result in some problems for you, okay? Because if you keep running to the boss or you run to HR and it's like, their question is going to be like, well, there's like 2 or 3 people between us here. Like, they're the ones that are supposed to be handling all this. Have you advised them? Have you given them a chance to resolve it? And you're like, no. It's like, well, okay, then you need to follow the procedure and talk to them. And they will not be happy that you've just gone over their heads, and then it will be another problem, right? So, I'm speaking generally. These things are highly dependent on the specifics. GTA says, companies like L'Oreal take 12 rounds of interviews just for internships. What should be the strategy to maneuver through that? Well, you see, if you are going through the official hiring process for them, for L'Oreal or whoever, if you want them to pick you, you have to play by their rules, as idiotic as they are and as ridiculous. 12 rounds of interviews for an internship, to me, that signals a company that A, doesn't know what it's doing, but worse, B, it's that there's no initiative or empowerment. Like, no one has authority to do anything. So normally, for picking someone in an internship, it should be, you could do it certainly in one interview with a verification of their education and, like work history, if that even applies, right? You shouldn't need 12 rounds. I did 9 rounds of a job interview for an executive position, and I thought that was ridiculous. So 12 rounds for an internship, that takes the cake. It takes the biscuit if you're from the UK. When you see someone from the UK, you tell them that, okay? For me. Okay, so the bottom line, though, is that if that's their process and you want them to pick you, you have to dance to their tune, unfortunately, okay? There are some ways around it. I talk a lot about those on my channel, where you go around all the stupid HR process. You talk right to the manager in charge of whatever it is, like in this case, it would be an internship, right? You can do that. That's another thing. But I can't, it's just not possible for me to explain in like a couple of minutes how to do all that. Okay, so that's the idea. And if that doesn't work for you, if you got better things to do with your life than sit in 12 job interviews for one internship position, don't like pursue other things that are much more reasonable, But if you don't have any other options, and you want these people to pick you, unfortunately, you're kind of trapped between a rock and a hard place. You have to go through this crap if you really want this, and you have no alternatives. So that's unfortunate. But I would say just put up with it. Put up with the stupidity. And if they turn you down, don't worry about it, because the fact that they require 12 interviews shows that they don't have a clue what they're doing. You know? Can you imagine, like, if that's what it takes to pick one intern? Like one intern being an extremely minor decision in running a business, you know? They need 12 interviews? Like, is this going to be multiple people at all the interviews? You know how much money that's going to cost in everyone's time? You know, that's going to cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars right there, right? That's what they're talking about. That's the amount of money they're spending to try and make sure this decision is as good as they could possibly get it. Or it's a decision by committee, right? So no one is responsible if the intern doesn't work out, right? That's likely what they're going for. A says, polygraph test for content manager position is insane. Definitely a red flag. Even the MI6 does not require a polygraph test. Yeah, but polygraph test, you can beat polygraph tests. That's why, you know, the MI6 doesn't require it. You know what I'm saying? Right? I'm sure they do other things. I vote for bare knuckle cage fight with the boss. And only one walks away. If it's you, you get the job. If it's them, they get to boss someone else around. Eric says, I have a star question that can be hard to gauge what exactly managers want to hear. Tell me about a time you received feedback that motivated you to perform better. Okay, so that's a really fancy way of saying, tell me about a time you got negative feedback, right? So obviously, the perfect story that you could tell for something like that, remember, it would be one of your 10 stories, right? Preferably a story where you failed, right? Or where you initially failed, but then turned it around, right? So you would tell the story in such a way that your initial attempt failed, and someone told you this. They said, well, I'm sorry, this is just not good enough. You know, I have the results just here of what you just did. Here's the results. They're not good. This is how it turned out. So there's your negative feedback right there. So upon hearing this, you realize that you had to redouble your efforts. You had to take a new approach. You had to somehow overcome it, right? So you explain what you did. So this is what I did. I had to go further. That's where I employed my creative solution, or whatever the story is that you're telling, and got the results that were satisfactory, was told they were satisfactory, and the person who gave me had given me the negative results earlier was satisfied. So that's how I overcame it. You know, something like that. It should be one of those 5 stories that you've prepared for yourself, right? Because any type of failure story would fit. Because for it to be a failure, someone has to tell you give you some kind of feedback that it's a failure, right? For you to overcome it. Does that make sense? Reese says, is there a way to spot a bait and switch? Well, if you're in a job interview, it's a bait and switch situation. So yes, pretty much every question they ask you, there's going to be a question behind the question, and it's some form of trap. Okay? You have a very complex relationship with the recruiter or the hiring manager, depending on who is interviewing you, your interviewer, okay? In some ways, they will be your ally in that they want you, they want to fill this position, and they would like you to be the person that fits the bill, so that they pick you and then the whole thing's over, right? But in other ways, they are your adversary, right? An extreme example is when they ask you for your salary expectations, right? They're hoping to get you for as little money as they possibly can, and you are hoping to get this job to pay you as much money as it possibly can, right? So you have polar opposite incentives, right? So they are your adversary. They are not on your side, and they are going to employ every trick in the book to trip you up and get what they want at your expense. Okay. So the other thing that they're doing in a job interview is they're trying to peel back the layers. You know, they've heard your sales pitch where you're the most wonderful person that ever walked the earth, right? Recruiters are not generally super bright, but they're not complete idiots too. They realize that that story is probably not the whole story. It could even be false, right? So what they want to do is they want to try and peel back the layers and verify what you're saying. That's why they ask you things like behavioral questions. Give me an example. Give me an example of, how great you are. Right? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of those questions. Like, I just did a video on the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Right? That is a trap, just like any other question. If you say you see yourself anywhere other than right here in this job, or possibly moving on, one level above this job, possibly, then that's a red flag. That you've just eliminated yourself. You're not a fit for this job. You've said you see yourself somewhere totally different, not in this role. That shows you're not a fit, right? You see how this works? What is your weakness? We just want to know that you're working on yourself and you are self-aware enough to recognize your own faults and do some self-improvement. So tell me, what is your weakness? Oh, well, my weakness is I'm not good at this. Oh, okay, thank you very much. We're not going to hire you because you're the type of employee that's not good at that. So we're going to go and hire someone who hasn't given us a real weakness in the job interview. You see how you walked into that? Pretty much almost every question is some form of trap, okay? So understanding the standard questions and understanding their tactics for how they're trying to get you to reveal things is paramount in a job interview, If you're interviewing for McDonald's or something, it's going to be very basic. But if you're interviewing for like an executive role or something like that, it's going to be very, very complex, So, but that's what they try and do. They look for weaknesses. Get to know your space facts. That's awesome. Says, how should I prepare for an interview after clearing a screening interview for an office administrator at a construction? Okay, let me see if I can interpret this grammar here. How should I prepare for an interview after clearing a screening interview? So the screening interview is what? Like a phone interview or an AI type interview? Checking the basic stuff. You pass that. Office administrator at a construction thing. Well, knowing if you're talking about construction company, like a general contractor or something, knowing a few construction companies, it almost seems like to get that job, if you're the office manager, maybe I shouldn't say this, but they're looking for a person who's a 100% psychopath that has skin so thick and they're so callous and unfeeling to their fellow human beings that they can deal with angry people with death threats and all kinds of stuff, and that just rolls right off their back. They don't care. That's been my experience. Listen, if you really want to know, here's what I would say. Okay. Am I an office manager at a construction company? No. So I can't give you the details because I don't know them. But if you want the details, it's very simple to get. Okay. Go on LinkedIn. Like I said earlier, go on LinkedIn, do a people search for office administrator or office manager, something like that. Construction. Limit the search to the construction industry. Limit the search to your hometown. And have it be a people search. So the results of that search are going to be individuals who are either now working in that role or are former people who have worked in that role. Okay. And if you can, so these are the people that they're going to be identified for you. So you can see who they are. You can also look at their resume, like you can see their profile. So you can see, like, here's what they have. They have these educational qualifications and this experience, right? Before they got the office administrator position at the construction company, right? Maybe they were all in the construction industry beforehand, or maybe they weren't. You can see things like that. Then if you want to go even deeper, you can contact them, because in LinkedIn, like you have multiple ways to reach out to these people. And you could ask them a question, you could send a message like a DM, or you could say like, would I be able to just call you? Like, just I'd love to be able to talk to you for, say, 10 minutes. I might be up for the role that you're now in at a different company. And I was just wondering if I could ask you a couple of questions about it. Would that be okay? You send out to like 50 people, like a template, and there'll be like a couple that will respond and say, sure, yeah, here's my number, yeah, I'll talk to you. I got no problem. You know what I mean? So that way you can get an exact answer. Okay. But it doesn't seem like it would be any different from any standard job interview. Go online and look at like what traits, go to ChatGPT and ask like, what traits would I need to be in that position? At the risk of like delaying everything for everyone, let's do this very quickly together, okay? Just to give an example for everyone here, okay? So what qualities would I need to have to pass a job interview for the position of office, administrator at a construction, I don't know, general contractor, whatever it is. I don't know the details. Contractor. Something like that, right? Now, I'll zoom in so you guys can see this here a bit better. Okay? So, you could like do basic stuff like this and just see if this makes sense. It's saying you got to need these. Industry-specific knowledge, maybe, okay? Soft skills, okay? This is what I'd suspect they're going to care about the most. Field crews, you're going to be interfacing with these problems. Professionalism. It depends what type of construction we're talking about, I guess. But you get the idea, right? So you can do these kinds of things too, just to do a sanity check there. But I would do the LinkedIn thing, okay? That will probably inform you more than anything, especially if you're just looking at people's profiles. There's a chance you might need the premium version of LinkedIn to do those searches and have all the results show up. But you can get the, try it for free for a month thing, and then just cancel before a month is over, and you don't have to pay anything. Okay, and that should give you the exact answer. Internet Vibe says, how do I convey my results in star format? Well, I just talked about that at the beginning of the stream. It took me like 10 minutes. I can't go back and say the whole thing. Just STAR, situation, task, action, result. Situation, I worked in this position. Task, I had to do this. I had to do this task. It was my job to inform the workers what their assignments were, whatever. Action, this is how I did it. I went and I talked to each one-on-one, or I sort of called a meeting and I did talk to the entire group. I said this, and this, right? Result, this is how it turned out. Everybody understood what they had to do. Everybody understood their expectations for the work they had to accomplish during the shift. They went and did it. Everything went according to plan. I was commended for being a good supervisor. The end. Right? That's the star format. There are other formats that are pretty much the same thing, just with different names. But that's basically it. They care most about the A and the R. What action did you take, and how did it turn out? So spend the most time on that stuff. Internet Vibes, it continues. I usually say something like, I was able to fix the records, yet they still ask what was the result. Okay, well then you repeat yourself, hey, it's not the end of the world. Whenever I go to a fast food place and I say they say, can I help you? And I say, yes, I'd like a coffee, please. And that's everything. And then they turn around and they go, is that everything? Yes, it is. That is everything. That is all, right? So yes, you have to repeat yourself every once in a while, but you know what? Get used to it, because humans are not very attentive in general. Here we go again. The Justiciary says, How to bring the fact that the position is underpaid for the position during an interview without having our own candidacy rejected. Tricky, yeah. How can I tell this person that they are a complete asshat without them taking offense, you know? If you ever figure the answer to that, let me know, because I'd be interested to hear. Yeah, you go in there and you say, you know what, you guys are unfair, you're not paying enough for this role, but I still hope you pick me for it. Yeah, good luck with that one. Pretty much that will eliminate you, right? If you float that idea. If you communicate that in any way, they're not going to pick you unless they have absolutely no choice because there's no one else, you know? Because what you're signaling that you think it's underpaid. And the assumption, therefore, is that if you believe it's underpaid, you're not going to be motivated in this role. You know, it's not paying you enough money. So you're going to disengage. You're going to, say, the hell with this. And you're going to slack off and you're going to slow down and you're going to take long breaks and stuff. And so if they suspect that in the job interview, just by what you just said, why keep you in the running? You know what I mean? They're going to proceed with someone that doesn't have any immediate red flags like that. So the answer is, of course, you can't say that and have them pick up on it, certainly, and get selected unless they're desperate and they have no other choice than to hire you. You know, maybe if that's how you feel about it, the simple solution to your problem, Justiciary, is just apply for better stuff, you know, that pays more. Blueshan says, I want land internship in UX design, please guide me. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. I mean, if you have a specific question, I can answer it, but you know, I mean, just what do you want me to say? Okay, first of all, you need to be qualified in UX design. Then you need to apply for the jobs. Then you need to learn how to do an application. Then you need to know how to do an interview. And then you need to know how to negotiate an offer, possibly. And then you get it. Alternatively, you don't have to necessarily do all of that. You could do networking instead. You could talk to the right people, the people that would hire you for that. So preferably someone who is a hiring manager or who's a hiring manager's boss. You see, talking to hiring managers can work, but the problem with hiring managers is that they're two things. Often they're very, very busy because we're usually talking about jobs that are at the bottom or like somewhere near the bottom. We're not talking about hiring executives here. We're talking about hiring people towards the bottom, like workers, professionals, right? In which case that makes them either frontline management or middle management. They tend to be very busy. And in addition, it tends usually to not be their job to take queries from the public, right? So if you're the team leader of some team of people that are doing the user experience design work, it's not officially part of your job to get communications from people outside the company that you don't know that want to talk to you. You know, that's not officially part of your job. Okay, so that's the downside to talking to hiring managers. You know, sometimes they won't respond simply because of that. It's not part of their job. They're not expecting this, and they don't really know how to handle it. However, executives, the bosses of these hiring managers, they tend, first of all, to have more time on their hands for things like this. And secondly, it is actually one of their official duties to take unsolicited queries from the public. Okay, that means that, you know, somebody contacts them they don't know, saying, you know, can I talk to you about the work that you guys do? You know, I have some questions. You know, I think we should get together and you know, talk about this industry, talk about some potential working together, right? It would be bad business if they said, "What? Who are you? How do you get this number? Go away." You know, that could be your next like strategic partner. That could be Google wanting to work with you. You know, you don't know, right? The only way you know is you entertain those, right? So if you want that position, you can get it on the hidden job market by going around the the official hiring procedure in the HR department. People do that all the time. But you need to be tuned into that stuff. So these are some options for you. If you want to learn that with me, I have all of that in the course. This course here, my Get Hired course. It talks about how to get hired for introverts, especially if you are applying to posted positions and doing everything as per the official HR procedure, right? Send in an application, get an interview, and then get an offer, right? I also talk about how introverts can get hired in the hidden job market by going around the official HR procedure, talking directly to the hiring managers and up. And that opens up a tremendous amount of possibilities for you. There's a lot of career opportunities that open up as soon as you do that. So that's all in that course if you want to learn that with me. But that's about the limit of what I can get into like live. But hopefully that helped. Peter says, if hiring managers look for candidates that are 100% match for the job description, how can there be professional growth for people that are looking to learn something new in a position and only have to say 9% of the skills? Excellent observation, Peter. The answer is that there isn't, right? You have spotted one of the many contradictions in the official HR process for recruitment and selection, right? It's up there with things like it's an entry-level position, but we need someone with 5 years experience, right? You ever seen that? That process is riddled with contradictions, right? And the answer to all of them in a nutshell is a couple of points. One is that the recruiters who are responsible for how they detect potential candidates, right? Which is, after all, the job of a recruiter, right? They are given a list of job requirements, and they are told, give me a list of people that have all of these requirements. Go. That's a recruiter's job. The recruiter themselves, they don't understand the job that they're hiring for, right? They don't understand the technicalities of any job that they're hiring for, because that's not their background. They're trained in HR. So if they were trying to fill a position that's for like accounting or UX design, user experience design, a design job, the recruiter knows nothing about design. The recruiter knows nothing about accounting, right? So consequently, that is a handicap to them. There are certain things that they can tell about you as a candidate, how motivated you are, whether what your ambition is, and whether that ties in with what the needs of the job are, things like that. How much money you need versus what the job pays. They can do elementary stuff like that, but the more sophisticated things in figuring out if you can fit in that job, they can't do, because they don't do accounting. They don't do user experience design. So how would they know? They can't, right? And because they don't know, that's a big part of why we see a lot of contradictions. The other reason we see a lot of contradictions is because this is not the way most people get hired, right? Another question you might be asking, Peter, is, if they need experience in the role as a condition of hiring you for the role, how would anyone ever change careers? Right? Like, usually the first question out of a recruiter's mouth, if you say, I would like this job, and they say, okay, how many years experience do you have in this job? And then you say, 0. Right? And then they say, well, then how do you think you can do this job? I'm sorry, no dice. Right? Right? You see, recruiters put an overemphasis on things like years of experience because they don't understand the jobs themselves. So if you reduce it right down to a metric like that, then they can make some kind of determination, right? But it's crap, frankly. And the answer, of course, is that people change careers all the time. And usually the way they do it is they don't go through recruiters, right? Most jobs, most people who get hired don't go through recruiters. So, yes, you are correct in pointing this out. it is far from perfect. Yeah, and oh, by the way, they don't care specifically about professional growth because their job is to fill a position. If you're a fit for the position, that's all they care about. They could care less about what happens to you in that role in the long term, right? And I'm being a bit callous about it, but that is true, right? Personal growth, that benefits you. That's what you would care about. Getting training on all kinds of skills and all this kind of stuff, that benefits you. If it doesn't directly apply to the job you're in, if it's not a requirement to help you do the job that you're in, the company doesn't care about that in itself. They only may start to care about that if they've done some kind of official determination that they're going to groom you for moving up a notch, right? Get you some training so you can be a failover if your boss retires or something like that. Katarina says, I accepted the offer and starting soon, but I would say to the second company that was also interviewing, just in case they call me for the last round. Yeah, pursue both equally, You don't have to choose, you know what I mean? If you can, ideally, get 2 offers in your hand, one from each company, then decide, And even when you get 2 offers, you can go further with that. You could go back to company A and say, well, I got another offer. I'm not going to give you the details, but it's for this much. Can you match it or can you exceed it? I'd like to work for you guys, but I got an offer for more, and then just see if they'll match it. And, you play one off against the other. And then whichever way it works out, you're working for the one that paid you more or compensates you in other ways, right? So you don't have to end one of these, opportunities prematurely. Even if you accept an offer with company A, I would say you've got nothing left to lose if you're already doing interviews with company B and they've invited you back for a final interview or something. I would say go for it. Get that offer in your hand if you can, and then reassess, These companies have absolutely no loyalty to you. They act entirely in their self-interest. You have permission to do the same, right? Blueshan says, whenever I tried to apply using LinkedIn, there are so many people who apply for one position. Is there any other way of getting an internship or any lead job? Yes, there are many ways. I talk about them on my channel quite a lot. There's a lot more methods of getting an internship than applying on LinkedIn. I can tell you that much right now. The easier a method is, the more public it is, the more self-defeating it is because everyone does it. And then when there's 800 applicants, you're going in there, you're going head to head with 800 people to compete for one position. You know what I mean? Now, some people can do that and win, but the vast majority of us, we can't, right? So the way you get hired is you compete on other things. One thing is soft skills. The other thing is initiative. There's 2 things right there, right? There are other things too, but let's focus on those, okay? So soft skills, right? Maybe you're technically not the most qualified person of the 800, okay? Or of all the people out there, right? But maybe you're the one that's the most enthusiastic, the one that's the most passionate, the one that's the most easy to get along with, the one that's the most accommodating and charismatic, the one that's the most agreeable, right? Other people come in there and they're arrogant. They've got all their little wants, wills, and needs. They demand more money and they demand this and they demand that. You don't. You go in there, you say, hey, whatever's fine. I would love the opportunity, They say, this is our process. It's okay, not a problem, You're just agreeable, right? That can beat technical qualifications hands down, okay? Because there's a lot of technically qualified people out there that are a nightmare to work with. Now, if you were the boss and you were deciding, okay, which one of these people do you want to work with? Whichever intern we select, you're going to be in charge of them. You have to work with them every day or something. So which one would you pick, right? It may not necessarily be the one with the most technical qualifications. It'll be the one that you want to work with the most. Maybe, that person just seems like really mean and, upset, or very finicky, and everything has to be to their liking, or they seem to get offended over every little thing. That one is very arrogant. This one, they're just happy to be there. They seem very accommodating. That's the person I want to work with, right? The other way you get a job is by being the one person who showed up, right? 800 people might click the apply button on LinkedIn. How many of those people will have called the hiring manager? How many of those people will have shown up to meet the hiring manager? It won't be 800, I can tell you that much. It might be 2, if that. Let's say it's 1, and you're the one. Now, at that point, the hiring manager still has to make a decision between 800 people. You're one of them, okay? You applied online, but you also showed up in person, okay? Now, at that point, they have to decide, should I pick someone that is just a resume on a desk? I don't know them. I've never met them. I don't know who they are. Everything on their resume could be a lie, for all I know, right? Or do I pick the one person that I've actually already met, the person that I can tell is genuinely very enthusiastic about this position because they showed up? That takes effort and time. And, it's maybe a little nerve-wracking sometimes, right? But they did that. So they obviously care about this. They care more than the other people that didn't. Now, I've already met them, so I already sort of know kind of that they look okay. They're groomed. They dress professionally, appropriately. I've heard them speak. We've had a conversation together. I know how they sound. They seem to know their stuff. They seem to have the right attitude. We got along really well. They seem to be professional, and I get the vibe from them that they would really, work hard at this. They seem very dedicated to this. So would I pick that person, or would I say, no, I'm going to go with someone that I don't know any of those things on, right? And go with them. Bring them in for an interview, not you. You think that happens a lot? You have a much, much higher chance of being selected, right? Were you the best person? Did you beat the other 800 like hands down going head to head with them? No, you're the only one that showed up. And that way you signaled that you cared more than all these others, right? Okay, so that's another way, right? Where was I here? This feed keeps moving, so God, I lost where I was. That was okay. So that was Blue Shan. So hopefully that makes sense. Blue Shan. So learn about some of these other methods. Like, you don't necessarily have to show up in person if you don't want to, but I'm saying, like, there's other ways of doing it. And in fact, most people don't go through these processes like LinkedIn to get the job. It's something like 20% of people get hired by applying to an online job posting, right? Whether that's on Indeed or LinkedIn or anywhere else, ZipRecruiter, Monster, all those other places. Most people don't use those. Most people get hired through other methods, right? Now, don't take my word for this. Go do your own research. Go learn about all these other methods, okay? The big one is networking. Go learn about networking. It's a fallacy that you need to know a million people. You don't. You could know absolutely nobody and get a job through networking quite relatively easily, right? So go learn about that. I have a couple of videos that are linked in the description box below this live stream. One is called Hidden Job Market. The other one is called How Successful People Get Jobs. So check those out. Those might give you some ideas. But I encourage you to learn about this stuff yourself. Get your information from a variety of sources. Don't get your information from any one source, and then more than just getting advice, go out and try things, okay? the more you learn about this, things like the hidden job market and things like, how to get a job through networking, it won't just benefit you now to get your next job. It will benefit you for the entire rest of your career. You will end up getting selected more. Opportunities will come your way more often, right? If you learn some of these principles. Okay, so there's a lot more at stake than simply like you just getting your next job quicker or something. Okay, you can get better jobs. The best jobs are not posted publicly because they don't need to post them publicly. They're not having any problems finding candidates. Why like go through all that trouble and all that expense to get like 800 resumes of strangers on your desk? You know what I mean? They've already got like 10 candidates that would be good. Why do they need to go through that to get even more that are probably of lesser caliber? You know what I mean? So learn about some of these things. It will benefit you for the rest of your career. You will make more money. You will go further. You'll have more success and you'll have more options. Whenever I talk about this stuff, what comes with it is I tend to go on a rant about how it annoys me that most people are not taught this stuff in school. Like, I had to learn this stuff the hard way. Nobody taught me this stuff in school. They give you the default thing about like, here's how you write a resume. Here's where you find the job listings. There you go. That's all you need to know. Go. It's like, I learned this stuff like when I got out in the workforce in the private sector, like after 10 years, you know what I mean? My mind started to open and it's like, you can do this stuff. So anyway, there's some learning to do. So do it. If you want to go deeper with me with this stuff, I have a course that talks about all that stuff. So you could check that out. There's a link in the description. But either or, tune into this stuff. It will only benefit you. If you are like Peter and you've noticed that there's a lot of contradictions and discrepancies in, what companies ask for in their job postings and how that process tends to work out, you're not alone. There are discrepancies. There's a ton of contradictions in it. And those are evidence that like this is not the whole story. You probably have someone in your own family who, if you're watching this now, like a parent or a sibling or a cousin or something, they're working in a job now. How did they get that job? It wasn't because they just applied cold. Maybe they knew someone at the company. Maybe they had a coworker, or maybe they walked into the company and had a conversation with one of the employees. Maybe they were the manager. Maybe they were somebody else, but that's what got them in the door. That's what got them hired, right? Now, if you're an introvert in this wonderful day where we have the internet, and we've had it for quite a while, you don't have to physically go and talk to people, really necessarily. Certainly not until they invite you in as like a referral, right? A lot of introverts, you guys are okay at talking to people if you've been invited in and people want to talk to you. It's not like a job interview where you're just treated like cattle. It's like, no, the boss has contacted you and they say, listen, I would very much like to speak with you. Can you come down? Is tomorrow okay? And when you get there, they know who you are. And this person is happy you came because they asked you to come down and you did. You're doing them a favor, right? And it's a totally different dynamic than a job interview where they grill you and they treat you like crap. This is more of like, thank you for coming down. Thank you for agreeing to do this, and then they have a few questions and they propose things to you and stuff like this. So, I mean, it's completely different. Most introverts, you're okay under those conditions, right? It's just when you feel like you're imposing or you're pushing yourself on someone, that's when it gets uncomfortable, right? So the point is, all the preliminary stuff, you do it all over social networking remotely. You don't have to do that stuff in person. Now, if someone wants to talk to you and, because they may have a job for you that they think, hey, you might be a fit for this, most introverts don't have a problem then coming down when they're only interviewing one person and it's you. And it's not even like an official thing. It's just to see if you're interested. Anyway, I'm filling air because there's nothing is moving in the chat. The chat has been frozen for like over 10 minutes. So if you guys got questions, I see there's 42 people here. Let me know what your questions are. I'm here to help you, but I'm just talking off the top of my head. Let me know if there's something specific you'd like to know. In half an hour, I have another live stream scheduled on this channel. So one way or another, I will be back in half an hour for sure. That's a stream called Honest HR Nitrous. I do it a couple times a week, and that's where we talk about the reality of job search. We're kind of already sort of doing it, but the reality of job search, not the theory, how it actually works out, complete with disrespectful recruiters and incompetent recruiters, and a lot of the contradictions that Peter was pointing out, that kind of thing, and what it all means and how you're supposed to do it. So join me for that later on. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for the next question, check out, I've got certainly 2 courses that are directly relevant to what we're talking about today. One is this, my Get Hired course. There's a link in the description. It's tailored a little bit more towards introverts, but it's how to get hired, how to get posted jobs that are posted online. So doing your resume, doing an application, doing a job interview, how to negotiate your offer, all that kind of stuff. And it also talks about how to get a job in the hidden job market where you're not doing that stuff. You're doing things like direct outreach and you're doing informational interviews and all the different stuff that you can do on that side. That's where 80% of the jobs are, right? I never get tired of saying this because it's true, because a lot of people still don't know this. All the jobs you see posted, like you look on the internet, on places like LinkedIn, places like Indeed, companies' website, like everywhere online, all those jobs you see, that's 20% of the jobs that are actually out there. The other 80% are not posted, and you can get them. They're there. You can get them. You just need to go about getting those with a different method, right? Now, once again, a common reaction when I say this to younger people that are not aware of this and they've never been told this is they don't believe me. All I can say is, don't take my word for it. You go do your own research, independently of me, and you'll see that this is true. And then once you've realized that, we can talk about how to get those jobs. Well, there's no new questions. Oh, here we go. Just in the last second. Okay, so Kevin. So excellent. Thank you for participating, everybody. Kevin says, how do I get interviews when employers are looking for people from certain groups? They seem candidates by asking videos. Are you talking about like all the DEI kind of stuff? Listen, I don't get into political stuff, but not all employers are looking for that. And even the ones that purport to be looking for it sometimes aren't looking for that. So if you don't feel like playing that game, there's nothing that says that you do. The thing that I was just talking about, the hidden job market, where they're not posting the jobs, but the jobs are there, right? Usually that sidesteps a lot of official crap like this, where they want to hire somebody because they feel they're qualified or they're a fit or something, but there's some kind of official thing where they can't. There's, you can go around all that stuff, and most companies don't even have those kinds of rules anyway, at least in my experience. So, so you don't have to bow to that, because if it did, it would mean that you would be unemployable, right? That's the implication. If they claim they want certain types of people and you don't fit into that, even though you're qualified for the role, even though you've been in that role for years, but for whatever reason they refuse to consider you for it. You know what I mean? Like, you can still get hired in that role. It's just that you have to go through, you have to look in different places for it. Um, and the other thing that I found the last few years is that as they've piled on the ridiculous sort of scrutiny of candidates, like somebody said earlier this stream, they were saying how whatever company I was it L'Oreal? They were saying that in their opinion, L'Oreal was needing 12 job interviews to select one intern, Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I could believe it. There are some companies that are doing ridiculous things like that. And then in addition, they want video interviews, like screening interviews, where you record a video and you submit it, things like this. They're intentionally making the process very, very long. And sometimes what we've seen is that that's a strategic decision, because you know how I was saying that you can get 800 applicants apply for a role, right? You post one job, you get 800 applicants in a very short amount of time. One way that some companies are countering that is they're making the hiring process so lengthy and cumbersome. There's so many steps and there's so much work you got to do to apply for the job. That's intentional, because the logic that they're employing is that if you get to the end of that process, you must really care about that job. You can't be just applying casually, right? So they're intentionally doing that, and they're like making you jump through all these hoops. Once again, that's the post-job market. You can always go around it, and most people do, So if you're not going around it, then maybe it's time you started. The Justiciary says, "Thank you for your precious discernment. Have an amazing day." Well, thank you, Justiciary. I think your name is awesome, and I hope you have a great day too. Twinkle Star says, "I just did the meet the team stage. It was my first time to ever do this during my hiring process. What can you say more about it? Thanks for your time and effort." Okay, so I have two answers for you. One is the non-cynical answer, and the other one is the cynical answer. In itself, there's nothing wrong with it. It could signal that they're, a friendly place and they actually care about the opinions of the people you will be working with. Okay, if it's like more than just your boss, you might be working with a lot of other people, and they may care about their opinion and make sure that people get along together and, there's no issues. Something like that, right? So, okay, that's the sort of optimistic view, and I stand by that. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. However, to give you a more cynical view is that I would sometimes, depending on the company, chalk it up to what I was just talking about, how they're making the hiring process extremely lengthy and cumbersome. And there's several reasons for that. If you're cynical like me, something that you have seen quite a lot is the reason people want to involve many decision makers in a process is because they are paranoid, and they don't want, like, the culture of the organization is like a cover your butt culture where everybody is perpetually afraid of being blamed for something, right? That's why people in those organizations tend to want to communicate over email instead of in person. So there's like everything is in writing. There's a record of everything. And they do this because, in my experience, it's more imagined than it is real. But it's like this idea that, oh no, if something goes wrong, oh no, we hired the wrong person. I don't want that to come back to me, even though I was the one that hired them, right? So I'm going to get everyone involved, all the big bosses and everything, so that if that employee doesn't work out, you can't pin the blame on me because, hey, you signed off on them. I recommended them, but you approved them. You didn't bring up any objections when I involved you in the process and gave you a chance to say no before we went ahead with it, right? So that's often what we see when they make collective decisions like this. And usually you find that in large organizations as opposed to small organizations. And what that signifies is it's an organization where the people at the top, they don't want the people in the middle and at the bottom to have any authority. They don't want them to have any power. They want all the decisions to bottleneck through them, the people at the top. They don't want to trust the employees in the middle at the bottom. I'm going to move my monitor so I don't smash it with my elbow like I almost did, right? And I've worked for organizations like that. Like I've worked for extreme versions of those organizations. And I've seen several organizations do that kind of thing. So it could be that, but you never know. So go down there, assume it's like a good thing. Go down there, just be super friendly, get along. I had to do that for one job I got way back in the day. I was like, they hired me to be a project leader. And I remember I went down there and I had to meet a few of these people. And I think I cracked a joke of some kind. I don't remember, but someone else remembered and told me years later. It's like, yeah, you made this joke. And I was like, oh. And they even told me the joke, and I can't remember it now, but it seemed pretty lame. But it got people sort of laughing. And I don't know, but I suspect that was like, that almost like sealed the deal. It's like, yeah, we like this person. They're fine. So just go down there and as much as you possibly can, just try to be a bit loosey-goosey, professional, but like not super uptight. Just, get along and be warm with kind of people, and that'll really do you some favors. Danulo says, what approach should I use if I try to get a position in a new field, but my skills have a wide application? So you're kind of a generalist is what you're saying, but you're trying to get a job in a very specific field that requires like only some of your skills. Am I interpreting that correctly? Or you're just trying to you're trying to change careers, getting a job in a new field. You're changing careers. If you're changing careers, hidden job market via networking, that'll do it. You don't have to have any experience in an industry. We all know that there's a lot of jobs out there. You don't need to have been in that job to get that job and make it work. Maybe there's a little bit of a learning curve, but, within a reasonable amount of time, you're up and running, you're productive, you can do it. We all know that. Recruiters give the impression they don't know that, but we all know it. So for those jobs, if you talk to a hiring manager and you show a lot of passion, you present yourself professionally, all your soft skills are really good. Like, they can communicate with you. They enjoy interacting with you. And then if you talk shop with them, like you talk about the technical details of the job, it's obvious that you know your stuff just by the questions you're asking or, that kind of thing. If you ask a very intelligent question about some technical aspect of the job that's not out to lunch and the boss kind of answers, and then, the boss says something and you say like, oh, is that because of this, or because of that? They can tell that you know what you're talking about. You know that area. You know what I mean? So, usually if they have a position, they'll give you a chance. That's usually how that works, right? If they've got a position they need filled, you're in front of them, they like you, they get the impression you know your stuff. You have a background that's not exactly in this, but it's something that's somewhat applicable. You know what I mean? And then you're very enthusiastic, very passionate about it. You put all that together, they will usually give you a chance. You know what I'm saying? That's how people change careers. Like, for example, what would be ideal is if you were changing careers and they had like a part-time position or sort of a temporary contract position or something. So it's almost like a probationary kind of thing, right? So it's like, okay, I don't want to commit to you and give you tenure and all this kind of stuff when I don't really know. But we got this thing, it's not the end of the world. It's just kind of like baby steps. You put your toe in the water, and we'll be able to see, if you kind of can hack it or not. And then if you do, within a short amount of time, we can make that permanent, or you can make it full-time, or you can move up into a slightly more advanced role where you're replacing a full-time person or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So you can do that. But it requires you to learn a new set of skills. You have to learn how to do this kind of thing, which is really not hard, but you still need to learn it. And yes, that's in my course. You have to keep plugging my course because people usually watch these streams for only a few minutes and then they're out. So if you're wanting to learn that stuff with me, check out that course that teaches you that. There's a link in the description. But regardless, learn all you can about this stuff. Don't get your information just from one source, all the time. Corroborate everything. But what's most important is that you try things. You learn a lot of this stuff by trying it, by doing it. Just like job interviews, no one is born good at job interviews. You have to do a few job interviews first to really get good, to really get comfortable and confident. They have to ask you questions you never anticipated for you to remember, oh yeah, I need to be prepared for this and this, right? Practice makes perfect. So get as much advice as you can, but then go out and start doing things. Bushan says, thank you so much. You're welcome, Bushan. Katarina says, thank you so much for videos and looking forward to your classes. Well, thank you, Katarina. That's very kind of you to say that. Reese says, would you rather work for a large company or a small one? Well, if you're asking me, I'd much rather work for a small one. I've worked for the Fortune 500 companies. That was like the first half of my career. And then the second half of my career was I worked for small companies, and it was far superior. Far superior. I'm glad I did, because I remember at the time, it's like I was looking for jobs, and my plan was to take 1 year off, 12 months off. And I remember I took 11 months off, and it was 11 months into it. I decided, you know what, I should just get back into applying for jobs, just because I'm going to need to do this seriously. So I'll just refresh myself. So I applied to a few positions, and then I got a callback for a company, and they were a small company. They were 50 employees or whatever. Now, that's still not small. I mean, you're making millions of dollars, with these operations, especially if you're in certain industries where you have a small number of employees, but you have a lot of money flowing through the company. A lot of resource dependent companies are like that, industrial companies are like that. It's not like working at McDonald's. You have a lot of employees and only a little bit of money flowing through it. This is the opposite, right? So it's they hired me for it, and I wasn't even really being serious. And I thought that okay, this is a smaller company. It's kind of a step down, but it's my eyes were opened. Imagine working in a place with no corporate BS. There's no power politics. There's no people keeping you down and keeping you in your place, stay in your lane kind of crap. You could just get on with your work. And everyone at the company was like that. You had workers that were tradespeople. And normally, I dealt with that kind of stuff before, but tradespeople were people that worked in a shop or a facility, and they had supervisors observing them all the time, standing over them, making sure they're working. They'd have to ask permission to go to the bathroom, and stuff like that, very, very tight control. And here I am at a smaller company where the tradespeople can take a piece of equipment, put it into the back of a company car or something, like a pickup truck, drive the car to a customer site by themselves, get out, deal with the customer by themselves without any kind of manager being involved, install the equipment, deal with all the people at the customer site, which is usually some massive power plant or oil refinery or something like that. And then, make their own arrangements for when they're going to come back to finish the install, go and independently do that, then come back when they're done and just, they'll get here when they get here and then they'll report, you know? It was like, I couldn't believe that. It's like, in my experience, like these people would never work independently. They weren't trusted to do anything under their own initiative. You know, they'd have to be micromanaged. So that was the difference between like big company culture, where nobody is trusted, nobody has any power or any authority really. It's all like the illusion of authority. Every big decision has to be approved by all the people at the top. Every decision bottlenecks through all the people at the top. Big companies that are full of people sitting in offices, just sending emails to each other all day long, not doing any actual work. You know, small company culture was like, wow, you've got a bunch of people that genuinely care about what they do. They're focused on doing the best job they can. They're focused on making money and, providing value for their customers, because they know that if they provide value, they do a good job and they get along with everybody in the process, that people will have them back, right? People will come back and get return business. And they also had policies of like, people are not allowed to have confrontations. If you have a dispute with somebody, you have to talk it out, go talk to the boss, get it resolved. Let's all just get along, get on with our work. It was great. I didn't know that kind of thing existed. You know what I mean? So I was very happy to come down in hindsight and go into smaller business like SMEs, like where I am in Canada. A small business means anything over. A medium-sized business means anything over 500 employees, right? So you could be at 400 employees and be considered a small business. You know what I mean? So I worked in small business, but done properly. And what I learned was there's all kinds of jobs in those businesses that you never hear advertised, because these companies don't have a lot of money to advertise far and wide, that they're hiring. And also, they don't need to, because all the best tradespeople and stuff, through word of mouth, they want to work for those places, So you don't really have a hard time finding good candidates for those roles, right? So I was on the other side of that too, and then I was hiring people and stuff. So, so I'm glad that I got out of the whole like big enterprise culture thing. And I'd recommend it to a lot of people too, if you can. At least that was my experience with it. But thanks for the question, Reese. That's a very long-winded answer, but there's your answer. Danielo says, try to change career. Thank you. Okay, good. Hopefully I read that correctly. I will just answer these two, and then I've got to go for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to be back. In 10 minutes, I have to be back because I have another live stream starting here. Kevin says, will not consider someone like me because of the way I look. I'm trying to get more qualifications to stand out, but even that does not seem to help much. Is there anything I can do? Yes, Kevin. Yes. The people that you've just described are a bunch of complete morons, okay? If they're not hiring you because of the way you look, that is the sign of a card-carrying moron, just so you know that, okay? Fortunately for you, not everybody is a moron who works at employers that are decision makers. You just need to connect with the people that, that don't have their head up their ass. And if that means going completely into the hidden job market, I'm assuming you're looking in the posted job market, and this is what you're encountering. Look in the hidden job market. Now, I just want to turn the tables on you for a second. Hopefully, when you say that they won't hire you for how you look, hopefully you actually know that, and you're not just assuming it, because you would not, if that is the case, you would not be the first person to incorrectly make that assumption, right? I've encountered that from a lot of people too, where they're just not qualified or as qualified as others, and so they don't get the job when they're put like head to head with other people. But then they conclude, oh, you must have not given it to me because of how I look, right? And that's false, right? Some people make that connection. They do that. They just assume it, and, that's something for you to encounter. You know what I mean? Like, look at me, for example. I'm overweight, right? That's pretty obvious. Some people, when they look at you, they see you for the first time. You may make a bad impression if you look like me, And yes, I know, I strongly suspect that there's been some people that have made that determination about me. But you know what? That's only a few people, and a lot of other people, they make their decisions based on real factors like results. So there will always be people that will judge you for whatever crazy reason, and that's fine. Life is a game of ignoring them and associating with the people that won't judge you unfairly. You know what I mean? And that way you can still prosper. Okay, so I mean, there you go. I guess that falls under the moniker of life lesson, which I'm not good at giving out to people, nor do I really want to. But look, Kevin, if this is what you're encountering, that's certainly not everyone that's doing that. I know that for a fact. So start by looking in the hidden job market and go from there. When people talk to you and they see that you know your stuff and you're easy to get along with and you're very friendly and you're a clear communicator and you present yourself professionally, they don't care what you look like. Talk to those people. Imram says, incident manager interview tomorrow. Any last minute tip? Nothing that really comes to mind. What's an incident manager interview? Like an incident manager? Is that like you're talking about like a safety? Is that in the safety department? I was head of safety for a company way back when. If that is what it is, safety is kind of a weird thing. You feel like a lawyer because everyone wants to just rush ahead and like get something done, make money, do a thing. And you're the one that's always going, wait. You're putting the brakes on everything. Now you know the rules. We need to do this properly. So you're the one that's slowing everyone down. And that takes a certain type of personality. Oh, you say IT operations. Okay, so it's not safety at all. So incident manager is like a position in IT. Okay, that's interesting. Any last minute tip? Well, if you're in IT, I'm going to make the assumption that you probably have below average social skills, and you're interviewing with people that have below average social skills. Not super strong soft skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, charisma, right? You probably make up for it by being pretty damn bright, as do they. But the weakness with people in IT, usually just playing the stereotype, is their soft skills, right? So if you go in there and you're friendly and you can communicate really well and you prioritize making it fun or enjoyable for them to interact with you, so that at the end of the meeting or the interview, whatever it is, they go away thinking like, wow, that person, they were easy to deal with and they were kind of fun to deal with, right? If you can make them feel like that by the end of the interview, so they're almost like sad it's over because they had a good time talking to you, that will go a long way to them picking you. There's a lot of people that have the technical chops, right? But not many people that have the technical chops that you enjoy dealing with day after day. That's what's like the tiebreaker in a lot of those situations. Okay, I have to go. Thank you for everyone who showed up. Check out my courses if you want to go further. They will help you get hired if that's what you're doing. This one will help you climb the ladder, get a manager position. I will be right back on this channel with a different live stream. Thanks so much. Take care of yourselves.